Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Archival Publication Authors Workshop. My name is Dr. Jackie El-Sayed, and I'm the Chief Academic Officer at ASEE. This APA workshop offered by ASEE is made possible thanks to a generous donation from the Kern Family Foundation. This workshop is part of a larger APA-ENG program, which seeks to build a collective, innovative, and entrepreneurial mindset and increase dissemination and recognition of faculty work through ideation, collaboration, team building, instruction and practice review, mentoring, and feedback. This workshop, which is comprised of 5 sessions, will provide your writing teams with instruction and expert feedback on the development of key components of your manuscripts, including your research questions, literature review, methods, findings, conclusions, as well as advice on how to navigate the process of journal selection, submission, and review. That's a big haul, but we know it's so important. We have 20 teams with 58 participants from across the US joining us in this workshop, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you. I myself am a professor emerita of mechanical engineering, and I have worked closely with Kern and Keen in the past, so I'm very excited about this work. Now I'd like to mention our wonderful advisory committee. We are extremely grateful. We are extremely grateful for the dedication and guidance that is being provided by the APA-ENG Advisory Committee, who possess the expertise in publishing, scholarship of teaching and learning, and entrepreneurial mindset. Our advisory committee members are Dr. Sarah Zappi, Research Professor, Penn State, Dr. Pransheth Asuri, Associate Professor and Director of Bioinnovation and Design Lab at Santa Clara University, Dr. Pratith Shakar, Assistant Professor, New Jersey Institute of Technology, and Dr. Doug Melton, Program Director, Kern Family Foundation. So thank you, our very important advisory committee. And now, equally important, I would like to introduce the ASEE staff who will be supporting the workshop. They are Sarah DeLoe, Research Projects Director, Alexander Sharp, Director of Education and Career Development, Kathy Coco, Senior Project Manager of Education and Career Development, and David Scott, Instructional Designer. Thank you, staff. Now, next, I'd like to introduce our mentors. And our mentors are a very important part of our programming. It is through those mentors that they provide the application and the feedback that all of you will be having on your writing. So introducing our mentors, then they will be working with you in the workshop. They have a lot of experience in writing and being published in refereed archival publications. Each writing team is assigned a mentor, and you should have already been notified who your team's mentor is. The workshop is designed to create opportunities for you to work closely with your mentors to strengthen your manuscripts. Our mentors are Casey Beddoes, Managing Director, San Jose State University, Catherine Bedander, Assistant Professor, Penn State, Stephanie Coulter, Assessment and Instructional Support Specialist and Associate Research Professor, Penn State, Walter Lee, Director of Research, Virginia Tech, Karen High, Professor, Clemson University, Nicole Peterson, Assistant Professor, Virginia Tech, John Park, Assistant Research Professor, Penn State, Courtney Faber, Research Assistant Professor and Lecturer, University of Tennessee at Knoxville, William Oakes Professor at Purdue University. And of this list, Dr. Hall and Dr. Parth are part of the Keen Network, and the Ohio State University is a Keen partner campus. Now let's look at the workshop overview. So this, as I mentioned, this is part of an entire program. But this workshop will follow the following pattern or structure. So we will have mentor panels, and this panel is a discussion among our mentors that recaps the previous session and assignment. The mentor panels will begin the next session, the next week in session 2. And this is where they're giving generalized impressions of strengths, areas for improvement, and insight. It's not specific, not anything specific to your team. That's going to be given to you in the breakout sessions with your mentors. But this will be generalized to get it so that everyone can hear from all of the mentors on that feedback. Number 2 will be spotlight on EM sessions. These sessions will feature leaders in the entrepreneurial mindset who explore EM and how you can integrate EM and entrepreneurial-minded learning into your manuscript. Third, instructor-led sessions. One or more speakers share insights on the specific manuscript-related topics. Today's instructor-led session will focus on developing an introduction and research question. Breakout sessions. After this instructor-led session, you will participate in a breakout session with your writing team to organize writing tasks based on the session. Once you have that time to think it through with your teams, then you will, and this is about your assignment for tonight, right? You'll be really thinking about how are we going to work together to do this assignment. And once you have that time with your team, then the teams will meet with the breakout groups with their mentors, and they will further drill down on writing what the tasks are in the discussions of what is that assignment you will be doing in the next week. After that, we will have a report out. The teams will report on the insights from the breakout sessions. So we encourage you to take advantage of the online resources offered during this workshop. The program has a website, which is the apa-eng.asw.org. And we'll share the link in the chat now, please. There's also a set of folders on the Google Drive that your team will use to work on assignments and manuscripts. Members of other writing teams will not be able to access your individual team folders. These folders will remain accessible after the workshop has ended to encourage the continued development of your manuscripts. We use this consistently, and we've had very good results. So next, let's talk about the logistic reminders. So here are a few reminders. You'll be reading and hearing about other writers' manuscripts over the course of the workshop. Please hold yourself to the highest ethical standards and keep all manuscript-specific information completely confidential. ASW is committed to making this workshop a collegial, safe, and inclusive environment. Please be polite and respectful with each other and avoid any inappropriate actions or statements based upon individual characteristics. You are welcome to ask questions using the chat pod in Zoom. A member of the ASW staff is continuously monitoring the chat, and we will do our best to answer your questions promptly. Now, remember to change your name on Zoom to the numeral of your team, space, first name, space, last name. And this helps us to be able to quickly move you into your breakout sessions. We're going to remind you for every session, we'll remind you to do this. There's now an example that's going to be posted in the chat. Lastly, please make sure that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking and your camera is off. This will help to improve the audio quality for everyone. Please be aware that all participant sessions are being recorded. The breakout sessions, however, will not be recorded. So now let's look at the larger APA overview. So as I mentioned, we have a whole program. So in the overview of the Archival Publication Authors Workshops for Engineering Educators Program, which is the full name when we are using the acronym APA-ENG. And it's aimed at increasing the capacity for engineering faculty to produce competitive manuscripts for referee journals and other publications in the area of the scholarship of teaching and learning. A key goal of this program is to increase the body of representative scholarly literature on entrepreneurial mindset, which works hand in hand with the scholarship of teaching and learning and can be applied, infused, adapted within engineering classes and curricula. The entrepreneurial mindset consists of three key elements: curiosity, connections, and creating value, or the 3 C's. Entrepreneur-minded individuals. The APA program started off this spring with a 3-day networking, ideation, and collaboration workshop that provided opportunities for participants to find writing partners, collectively develop ideas with potential for publication, and increase collaboration competency. The workshop was offered both synchronously and asynchronously. The goal of the APA workshop is to facilitate growth in the manuscript writing skills with the understanding of the review process, leading to the development and refinement of new manuscripts that are intended to be submitted for publication in a peer review journal. In addition to these workshops sessions, you will have, in addition to attending the workshops, you will have weekly assignments where you'll be tasked with writing different sections of your manuscript. We work with the instructors to ensure that the assignments provide practical application of the session's manuscript component. It's important to be fully involved in the assignment to help drill down on the instruction level. This will also enable you to engage your mentors with questions to provide better understanding of the topic. Your assigned mentors will provide feedback each week in your Google Drive folder. You will also receive feedback through office hours that your mentors will set up with you. So you're going to have both written feedback, and you'll also be able to have a chance to talk over with your mentor. We encourage you to fully participate in the workshop activities to enhance the value for you. Now, the mentoring program, as previously mentioned, will be providing experienced coaching to support writing teams' progression throughout the APA-ENG program and provide guidance in the manuscript development process. At the conclusion of the APA workshop, you will have the opportunity to apply for a mini grant program. This program will provide seed funding for up to 10 writing teams to jumpstart or pilot your writing project to strengthen your manuscripts. The MGP, which is the mini grant program, will begin accepting applications in early fall, and applicants will be notified of the decisions in November of 2022, or will be dispensed in November of 2022. Solicitation details for the MGP will be communicated during the final session of the APA on August 12th. So that's part of the larger program, the NIC, the APA, and then the mini grant program. So let me just check here a minute. All right, so now I would like to introduce, I must announce a last minute change to today's agenda. Cheryl Bodner unfortunately had a family emergency and was unable to make it to today's session, but she did provide her slides, which we will share with you after the workshop. However, instead, we will have Dr. Doug Melton, who will be speaking on an introduction to entrepreneur mindset. Let me introduce him. Since 2012, Dr. Melton has served as program director for the Kern Family Foundation. In that role, he helped grow a network of 49 university partners known as Kern, who will share the mission of developing entrepreneurial-minded engineers. Through joint work with the faculty at partner universities, Dr. Melton has established the Engineering Unleashed Faculty Development Program, coupling teaching, research, and service aims of faculty members to this shared mission. The program serves hundreds of faculty across the country annually. Prior to working at the Kern Family Foundation, Dr. Melton was a faculty member for 17 years within the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Kettering University. With that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Melton.
There. I don't know if I need to do anything, Jackie, to adjust. I am, as you heard, I'm a last minute addition. Happy to stand in for Cheryl Bodner. I think I can share some of the things, knowing her scholarship, knowing her background, I can share some of the things she is interested in and relates, but I can also bring you maybe a foundation perspective on some of the work. So thank you, first of all, to Jackie, and thanks to ASEE for pursuing this particular activity. There's a tremendous need, we believe, in kind of three things. I think the three goals of this entire activity, just to underscore them, it's for you as a faculty member, certainly, and we hope this supports your work, your press into scholarship. It also supports the entire community, but of scholarship, of teaching and learning. But it also underscores the need for increased focus, increased credibility to be assigned to entrepreneurial mindset, something that a number of scholars around the country, both in the Keen network, outside the Keen network, if you're familiar with it, on Engineering Unleashed and outside, and even globally, are working on how do we build a base of literature that appropriately connects in entrepreneurial mindset and treats it in a scholarly way. So I'm glad that this activity has been undertaken by the ASEE and by you. So thanks, first of all. When I think about what you might need and what questions you might have in the work that you're pursuing as teams, as scholars, as researchers, one of the questions that comes up, and I will tell you that my presentation, I am absolutely, we'll have pauses at times to get questions so we can kind of move forward in this together. But one of the things that I started thinking about, I'll do a screen share. You know, what is your research and scholarship about? Some people that are involved in this work are really interested in measuring entrepreneurial mindset. They might have some interventions, they might have programs, extracurriculars that are intended to shape a student's entrepreneurial mindset or a graduate's entrepreneurial mindset. And so they might be interested in the left-hand side. How do you actually measure this? There's an assessment group that I can direct you to that's doing the appropriate and varied but serious level of work on how you do this. Sometimes it's measured through behavioral processes or behavioral measures, things that are assigned to this is a behavior that might connect to someone who's entrepreneurially minded, and those are measures. Other times it's connected to more things that are psychometric or something that comes out of educational psychology. So that left-hand side is kind of in the assessment of the mindset itself. After looking at many teams' work, maybe you're on the right-hand side. You know, you might be focusing on a broader aspect of engineering education, but perhaps there is a connected feature in entrepreneurial mindset that you want to bring to the forefront, but you're really studying something that might be in, you know, not directly entrepreneurial mindset. How do we bring that to bear? Well, so in what I have to present and share today, I quickly assembled 2 or 3 things that you can access. And I'll try to relate these in a way that I think, you know, that researcher, Cheryl Bodner, who's scheduled to be here, would relate them kind of in a, she focuses very much on connections between things and concept maps. So I'll try to relate them in that way. Before we just charge forward, I wanted to stop and invite comments, and perhaps the best way to do that is just through the chat mechanism. So I'll try to monitor this while going through, but if this diagram gives you pause, or if you say I'm on the left or the right hand side of this, or neither, maybe just throwing something into chat would be helpful for this community to even recognize, and your teammates to recognize, what are we exactly working on? How does it relate to entrepreneurial mindset? As you're doing that, I'd go ahead and encourage you to do that now. As you're doing that, throughout the series of these sessions, there will be speakers that are scholars that have published in this area that'll be coming to, like Cheryl had planned to, that'll be coming to share different aspects of entrepreneurial mindset. And so I'm going to jump over and just see what's coming up in the chat. Hopefully you've had a chance to even add something now, but please do so. Oh, can the participants, I don't know this fact or not, just joining at this time, can the participants add to the chat? Jackie, Alex?
Yes, they can. They've already added their names and their, as they came in and introduced themselves to each other using the chat to everyone.
Terrific. Does this make sense? Does it not make sense? The diagram that's up there, that's what I'd invite you to do, and then we'll proceed forward.
So Doug, you're saying that you'd like everybody to make a comment in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay.
There is exactly Team 18. I didn't know there are team numbers, but this is fantastic. You should have shirts. Team 18 is on the left-hand side. So they're actually studying entrepreneurial mindset itself. Okay. It's helpful to know, and it's helpful to know. I'm glad these are popping up in the chat, because it will help me as to guide me through even the rest of the presentation. But I think even through the rest of the sessions, it will help you and your team to be clear, like, what are we actually doing and how does entrepreneurial mindset come into this, so that when future presenters on EM or entrepreneurial mindset are presenting, you kind of know that this is a related piece or we're directly interested in the EM piece. RHS, I like that right-hand side. It reminds me of poles and zeros for those of you who have studied control systems.
And
it also reminds me of the right-hand rule.
All right.
I'm Ann Leek. Also, I just wanted to tell you, I can't use the chat right now while I'm on Zoom, but I'm really excited about this. I've done some work with physics, entrepreneurial thinking. So bringing it over to engineering is really awesome, because you all are the experts in it. So I'm excited to learn more.
I want to share. So when I had a recent meeting actually with Cheryl, our plan presenter, and knowing her interest in concept maps, I talked to her about some software that I've recently discovered. For what it's worth, I'm going to throw it up on screen, because if you're interested at all in concept maps, which is related to the connections that people find among things, and connected thinking is certainly an aspect of entrepreneurial minded thinking that's come out in a variety of literature. The concept maps, I'm going to use this. I'd be interested to know if any of you have run across a piece of software called Obsidian. It is, I think it's on version 0 point something. It's one of those community developed pieces of software which helps identify concepts between things. Each one of these files are simple notes, like connections is one component of entrepreneurial mindset. And I'll show you some links that are within. But then Cheryl actually studies the way students form concept maps. And they might be concepts that are technical in your class. And when I think about this, I'm often thinking of kind of the physics inventory of concepts, but it might be concepts that might be related to something as direct as maybe in a statics class. What are the concepts that surround free body diagrams, sum of forces, et cetera? And so you can form these things. And I've actually seen some pretty elaborate, I'm going to show you one elaborate version, and then I'll jump back to this, because we're going to make use of, I cobbled up a map. After I learned that I was presenting today, I cobbled up a map very quickly. But let me show you somebody that's done some more serious work in this area. And I think you'll enjoy it. And it's also, I find it a little bit intimidating, but there's something very cool about it. Here it comes. There's an individual who's been compiling around quantum physics, a collection of concept maps. And so in any one of these categories, there might be some notes. And within these notes, there'll be a variety of, as you can see, kind of equations. And then off to the right-hand side, if you can make that out, is a collection of related concepts associated with this. And it's interesting how even with topics like entrepreneurial mindset, that a particular technical topic can be connected to whether it's maybe a value or a need or a socio-demographic topic, or all sorts of things start becoming connected for people who think in this way. Cheryl focuses on that. In fact, she has her students often form concept maps as they're going through particular material, and then she has a grading mechanism or an assessment mechanism to determine the quality of those concepts. I wanted to illustrate this one. If you wanted to kind of get some sort of overview of this, it's a little bit intimidating as soon as you start kind of blowing up any collection of concepts. But it's also sort of fascinating to see how the concept map can be used for connected thinking. When I go back to the screen share that I was showing you moments ago, which is my simple version. So far, I'm going to start building this thing out. Maybe Cheryl and I will end up working together. Maybe you'll find some value in this. But I use this just as a vehicle to help us talk through some topics today. You know, entrepreneurial mindset, we often, as Jackie mentioned, we talk about 3 elements. Are they the only 3 elements? No, I don't think so. In fact, the Kern framework, if you're familiar with it, uses these 3 elements, but it's always intended as a starter framework. It's a working framework that helps a collection of people talk about some things that are certainly part of entrepreneurial mindset, but it's not intended to be exhaustive, entirely complete. In fact, that would be almost antithetical if it was. So it's intended to just be a starter set. So sometimes topics like creating value might have a couple of other topics like identify unexpected opportunities or persist and learn through failure. What does that mean? Well, again, the reason for showing you this kind of connection diagram is kind of in the spirit of what Cheryl would show, but I also found some utility maybe in just presenting this to you with something, a jumping off point. I will cut and paste a few things into chat so that you've got copies of these. But let me jump to, I'm going to jump to the card that's associated with this, and it's called Curiosity. What do we mean? So let me, I'll do that. I'll have to stop the share.
While you're doing that, one of our mentors commented that it looks like a social network analysis model.
Very much so. People have used this software for social networking. I talked to someone, a researcher last night, who's using it with Myers-Briggs and other kind of personality mapping on top of social networking. It's kind of fascinating, some of these, the way the connected thinking is encouraged by some of these newer software tools. So my intent today is just to give you a quick flyover of entrepreneurial mindset, but leave you with a place to go when you want to dig in a little bit deeper. Maybe during your research, you need to find instruments that you can use, surveys. You need to reference materials. Certainly that's important to be able to reference and cite literature, legacy literature. And so one of the things that we have been doing over time is just trying to say, well, curiosity or maybe connections or creating value, what do we really mean? These particular cards are on the website called Engineering Unleashed. You can register on this website. If you're not already registered, please go ahead and just do so. It's a simple registration. Everyone is invited. All faculty are invited. It's mainly intended for a faculty audience. So that website called Engineering Unleashed, it's at the root of this, is a platform. On this platform, people share these things called cards. And cards are just generic resources that may have links and other citations, other resources. They're kind of like a work in progress. In fact, many people that are involved today may be taking a card and leveling it up to an archival publication. And so they're going to be asking throughout this workshop, how do I do that effectively? So, but one of the cards that I was just at is titled, let's see, I think this, hopefully it'll reload.
Doug, could you mention the number of the card? Somebody's asking that.
Oh, yeah. So there are a total of about 2,000 of these cards on a variety of topics. Let me show you. Let me just do something just as a demonstrator. So
yeah, there's
I'll
a couple of more questions. Let me make sure we answer them. Is registration required to access the EM related resources on Engineering Unleashed?
Yes, but there's no charge there, and it's open membership, so you're certainly invited. But I think registration is a one-page registration, which has hopefully that individual will have a chance to fill out profile, throw up a picture, because there's a community that's associated with this. And let me show you, I'm just going to put in a topic like ethics. If you haven't done this before, you haven't been on the website, this will be helpful. While it may be the fourth or fifth or maybe the seventh thing on this menu, these cards have become the community's way of exchanging something that's kind of like a work in progress, sometimes very complete actually, but it's written for adaptation of you or addition or comment. It's very much a kind of active kind of network. So I just searched for ethics just so you can, there's 144 cards out of the 2,000 that have some content related to ethics. Apparently 66 members on the platform, and somebody might ask, how many people are actually on this? 4,300. And so at this time, there's 4,300. A large number are engineering educators. There's a very significant, about 1,000 of those folks, maybe from other disciplines, from the humanities, sciences, elsewhere. So we're actually thrilled about that. There are 13 articles about ethics. There are forums that are connected to ethics, and there are cards. And so as I look down through these cards, I'm going to grab this particular card called Taking Action on Ethics. I picked that because I do happen to know the authors of this card, and I've seen this card before to know it's got some really nice content. And within there, you'll find, just like you would an abstract, authors from Heather Dillon from University of Washington, Tacoma, and Jeffrey Wells from University of Portland. There are learning objectives. There's kind of a process. Here's what this is for. It's a piece of, it's an intervention. And there are materials that you can download or link to. And so this platform has become an incredible resource. If you're doing some research work, do some searching on this platform to see if there's related work or resources that are already connected to entrepreneurial mindset, because that's the centerpiece of these cards. They're already connected to entrepreneurial mindset. I had commented on this card, but other people in the network have commented on this card, and there's a discussion. So it provides an opportunity to actually have some live conversation and connect to the authors, which is just the wonderful feature that's not to be missed. And most authors, as you might guess, are eager to talk about what they have been doing. So great resources, lots of topics, obviously many more than just ethics. Ethics was an easy one to pick out, but these cards are general purpose. And so I'm going to even take us back to where I started with the curiosity card. if you go, okay, curiosity is a great topic, but that alone, just that term can mean lots of different things. So what do we mean when we talk about curiosity as it's connected to entrepreneurial mindset? And what resources are there? So this becomes like a good first place to dig into this element of entrepreneurial mindset. And there are a couple starter terms that are associated with this particular brand of curiosity. If you start thinking about curiosity itself, and fundamentally, could it be an information gap? Maybe it's something that you don't know that you need to know, or is it an interest? Is it something that you just enjoy? There's all sorts of reasons for curiosity. One reason for curiosity might be around where's the future going? And so that's one aspect of this particular brand of curiosity that we know is connected to being entrepreneurially minded. Where's the future going? So you might say it's really interesting what is maybe in your Apple Watch, what comprises that, what processor, what's materials. But another more interesting or entrepreneurially minded idea is, where is the future of wearable computing going? This kind of forward look is part. And so there's a certain flavor, if you will, of curiosity. And another feature is exploring a contrarian view of accepted solutions. And so these are just a couple of starter terms that are helpful to talk about curiosity. And this card lays out some details, but maybe most importantly for this audience, if you want to dig into this particular topic or this particular aspect of entrepreneurial mindset, it might be helpful to dig into, there's a collection of books, there is a collection of literature. This reaches back into some kind of seminal literature by Lowenstein around the psychology of curiosity. And this is a great starting place to pick up some of those papers to go, if I want to dig or reference or cite, this is a great place. The other area is just you'll find lots of people on this platform that are already kind of pursuing some things, maybe have created instruments around curiosity. So we can talk about that as well. All right, I will jump back to a couple of other cards. Here's my, I didn't anticipate kind of demonstrating Engineering Unleashed. I was just going to show you the three aspects of entrepreneurial mindset, but I think this is a great opportunity because it's a tool that you can use. So I'm just going to put in the search term, what do we mean? Because I know there are three cards that pop up. What do we mean by connections? We already looked at what do we mean by curiosity and what do we mean by creating value. So each of these cards, in some cases, have multiple authors, like the connections piece is co-authored with Joe Tranquillo. Some of you may know him from Bucknell University. And again, it contains a range of topics and how to think about connections. Cheryl Bodner, as I mentioned, uses concept maps to think about connections, but it's certainly not the only way to think about connections, and there are some associated resources. The same is true, and I'll do to be kind of complete here and then stop for questions. What do we mean by creating value? The late Bill Klein and I worked on some of the ideas around what do we mean by creating value, and everybody's adding to this. This is all co-created. One thing about this platform and these ideas is you can add to them, and so I expect that your scholarship will. So this is about what do we mean by creating value, which again has collections of resources around that and some key ideas. I'm going to stop there. Again, trying to fill a gap and share a little bit around entrepreneurial mindset, but most importantly, give you some tools so that you've got kind of a jumping off point to dig into that original diagram that I had, whether you're on the left-hand side or right-hand side of that, you've got a clearer view of entrepreneurial mindset. let me open up the chat, see where we're at, see if there are any questions that jump out, and I'll ask my ASWE colleagues to help field those questions, if you would.
I'm monitoring the chat, Doug, and I've asked people when you were talking because people wanted to share their slides, their cards, and so they've been sharing the cards that they've authored in the chat.
Oh, God,
and then, somebody's asking, could you share the slide again that says left or right?
Oh, yeah. And I put this together in such haste that I thought maybe there's a typo. I hope not. You let me know if it needs modified or anything like that.
Yeah, that's fine. People are excited about it, Doug. So.
Okay. I just thought that this, for me, if I were in your shoes, I would want to make this decision. Do I want to measure entrepreneurial mindset, or am I really kind of just working aside or alongside the entrepreneurial minded piece? And I can think of great reasons to be on either side of these things. All right.
Well, I just thought I would mention that you and I had a discussion because there's so much great content in the cards, but as we are both former faculty, we know that it's really important to publish in order for our tenure, for our annual merit. And so it's really something that led us to create this workshop that we are doing now.
Yeah.
So people are mentioning, I think you have it pulled up. So anybody have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. And also, I think, Doug, you're more than willing to have them unmute and ask you as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I entertain any conversation, and maybe even just kind of set the tone from the foundation's perspective. Entrepreneurial mindset existed before the work of Keen, and it has been around, thankfully, kind of pushing human progress for a long time. And so we have I think our work is just, how do we amplify this in engineering education? Make sure that that the scholars that are working on it receive due credit for their work, and kind of build a good direction as a community. And so the foundation's posture around this is, how can we help? And that's truly where we're coming from with this approach. And we're thrilled that ASWE has joined us in this effort. So let me see if one of the things I am loving about this is seeing the people that already have cards on Engineering Unleashed. And it's kind of funny. Some cards I have actually started to know by number, because each card you'll see in the URLs have a number. So there's card 1017, and you start learning these cards by number. It's actually kind of a fun way to identify them.
I love the fact that people are so excited to share their cards in the chat. That is really showing so much passion. Here's a question for you, Doug. Are there colleges and universities that offer formal degrees, minor certificates in EM?
No. I think certainly there's plenty of colleges and universities that focus on entrepreneurship. And I think that question is an opportunity to talk about the difference between entrepreneurship, which is the creation of new businesses, new startups, and this broader notion of entrepreneurial mindset, which really gets back to the idea of maybe the most salient C of the 3 C's is creating value. But value can be assigned through a variety. Maybe it's personal value, maybe it's societal value, perhaps it's economic value. But value is a broader term, and I think it lands better in what we're trying to accomplish. So our focus is certainly not startups. There are many colleges that do. To answer that question, there are many colleges that focus on entrepreneurship and programs that focus on entrepreneurship. But to my knowledge, none that focus on mindset. And maybe that's good, because mindset needs to be integrated with other topics. And that's why we enjoy being integrated as part of, engineering programs. If it were just mindset, you really need a skill set to go along with that. And so it always seems to be integrated with something. Yeah. See any
People are
other
still-
topics? Yeah.
Yeah, people are still sharing out about their cards with everyone, and they are interested in the software you mentioned, and somebody,
Oh.
they asked for the name because they're in the card, but someone answered it. But you want to mention a little bit more
Okay.
about that?
Yeah, in fact, this is almost actually the software, I'll put the name in there. It's called Obsidian. It's a community-based software. It is, you know, I'm kind of problematic that I get very excited about things. So I'm very excited about this software and the way it kind of helps me take notes in the way that I think. If you end up looking at this and seeing some sort of project that connects engineering education to Obsidian, I've actually thought about, if I taught my signal processing class that I used to teach, I would use this and have the students form their own concept map that would be something they could take with them. And since they formed it, rather than me giving it to them, it would be more meaningful. But I'm kind of excited about it. If it trips your trigger, reach out to me, please.
Yep. People are saying they just registered on Engineering Unleashed.
Okay.
And people are putting chats here about
Yeah.
Obsidian. Thanks, Alan. I know Alan Cheville. How are you? So a lot of enthusiasm here.
Good. What I regret that you aren't able to see is some more detail around those concept maps. So you are going to get Cheryl Bodner's collection of slides. It's a nice take on concept maps and how they're an important part of this connected thinking. So ASWE will be providing that as part of the proceedings here. Beyond that, I think we're open for conversation around your topics, your research. We're going to stay involved at the foundation, stay involved with the process, and eager to see what develops out of this entire enterprise. So I just want to say thanks again for your intellectual investment in this effort. Jackie, anything else I can do?
No, thanks, Doug. And I think that someone was asking about the focus of the workshop. So this is definitely we're going to be walking through manuscript development. And how do you take wherever you have your content now? This would be an example of cards, right? But wherever you have your content now, then we're going to be walking through how do you put together a manuscript. And because this is about curricula or concepts which are about teaching and learning, that's why we're talking about the scholarship of teaching and learning. Because a lot of times as engineers, of course, we are trained and educated about our particular discipline, our technical discipline, but we're not always, unless we have had some education in engineering education, we don't always understand how do we put together a manuscript about the scholarship of teaching and learning. So in order to publish that, then there is a process for that too. So that's what we'll be focused on this workshop.
Yeah, perfect partnership.
Sorry, that is my cat, if anybody can hear it. She is 20 years old, so she sings sometimes. So thanks, Doug. There's a lot of excitement about the resources that you shared. And I can see that you're getting a lot of thanks in the chat. Not sure if you're seeing that, but they're all saying thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to ask Alex. We have about 15 minutes, right, Alex, before the break?
Yes, we have a good amount of time. Our next session, which focuses on your research question, will begin at 2:15 Eastern time. So what we do with this next 25 minutes, I mean, I think we can throw it up to the group if we want to have like a very nice long brain break, or maybe just stay in here and share some thoughts and questions with the full group for a few more minutes. So do you want to throw it to the team and you can write in the chat what you'd rather do?
Mhm.
Or they could go dig on something on Engineering Unleashed.
That's
That's
Just
very
a plug.
true.
You know, you put me in the place, I will plug it. So it's good.
Yeah. So let's put back in the, I think someone could put the Engineering Unleashed link into the chat. I know that people have already found it because I see people registering it. And maybe you could take the next 10 minutes to go and, oh, thank you. Thanks, Alex. Alex put it in the chat. So why don't you go ahead and look up some of your colleagues' paper cards. They put them in the chat. Look up a concept that you're interested in. Take a few minutes to do that. And then on the hour, we will go for our break. Does that sound good to you, Alex?
That is perfect.
And feel free to use the chat as to share what you're finding on Engineering Unleashed. That would be great.
So since this is an informal session before our break, I think we can pause the recording. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So now we're going to have a session on how to build your manuscript introduction and research question, which will be led by Dr. Janice Miller-Young. Dr. Miller-Young conducted her first Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, or SOTL, study in engineering education in 2009, and has been doing SOTL work ever since. More recently, she has spent time working in multidisciplinary teaching contexts, serving as the director for the Institute for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, now the Mokakis, sorry about that, Mokakis Center for Scholarship of Teaching and Learning at Mount Royal University, and as the academic director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at the University of Alberta. She writes about not only student learning, but also about faculty learning in higher education and about SOTL methods and methodology. Now I turn it over to Dr. Miller-Young.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Jackie's cat is also really excited about this session.
And I'm going to start sharing. There we go. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Great. Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you all for coming, and thanks also to ASCE for asking me. First of all, I'm going to be saying SOTL because that's kind of the way I've always said the term, and I know that it's pronounced or said differently in different contexts. And I could try to say SOTL if that's the term that you're using or the way that you're expressing it, but I'll probably forget at least partway through the presentation. So I'll put that out there right away. Yeah, I'm just thrilled to be talking to people who are working in engineering contexts and also interested in doing SOTL, because this has really been my biggest passion for quite some time. So I'm thrilled to be here, and it's going to be a bit tricky to try to talk about writing an introduction without having a good sense of all of your SOTL projects. So I do have a little bit of time planned to just kind of ask you about a little bit of information about what you're working on in the middle of this presentation. But first, I thought I'd give you a little bit of background and a little bit about my thinking about SOTL or SOTL, and then talk about what I've learned about writing a good introduction and research question. Before we start, because I'm in Canada, you may have heard of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which operated in Canada a little while ago and came up with a series of recommendations for Canadians to try to start to reconcile with Indigenous peoples in our country, or their country, you might say, because of so many injustices that have happened over the years. And so one of the recommendations of that commission is to give a land acknowledgement at the beginning of any presentation or group event as a way of just raising awareness. So this is a Canadian thing, but probably also important, at least in some areas of the United States as well. So that's the purpose of my statement here. I am from the University of Alberta, which is in Edmonton. That is called Treaty 6 territory, and it is a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. And I feel very fortunate to be at the University of Alberta, which has one of the only faculties of Native Studies is the term for the faculty here, and we have quite a large Indigenous population here, and some very interesting work going on in that respect. So today I thought what we would talk about would be, of course, your target audience to start with, because if you're going to be writing up a SOTL project, you first of all need to figure out what your message is. Of course, I'm assuming you have an idea about that. But that is going to really help you frame your whole introduction, and you're going to have to think about whether your message is going to be a disciplinary or a multidisciplinary audience for starters, and how much you think you're contributing to either theoretical or practical knowledge, and that's going to help determine your audience. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about looking at target journals and how to kind of evaluate them as to whether they're a good venue for what you want to say, because again, that's going to help you frame your introduction in the most appropriate way possible for that particular audience. We'll talk about types of studies and scopes of studies as different factors that might help you decide on that. And then, of course, the content itself that goes into the introduction. And again, we are focusing on the introduction today, but because in the introduction you want to funnel down to giving a rationale for the rest of your paper, of course, that's going to have to consider also the methodology and methods of your study and the results, or in other words, the message and the findings that you ultimately want to say. So we'll have to take that into consideration a little bit as well, but we'll really focus on writing the introduction. Just a quick little bit about me, building on what was said in the introduction. I have had quite a wandering path, a non-traditional path, I would say, to my current engineering faculty position. So after my undergrad, I worked in the oil industry for a number of years. I did my bachelor's in Calgary, which is sort of the oil capital of Canada. So that was a fairly natural thing to do at the time. So I did that for a couple of years, but I really became interested in biomechanics. So I went back to do my PhD in that. And then, of course, I was at the period of my life where I wanted to have a family. I have 3 wonderful children. So by the time I finished my PhD, I was really interested in taking a more teaching-focused faculty position. Just a little bit more flexibility and less busyness, you might say, compared to a traditional research position. So I worked at Mount Royal University for a number of years. That's in Calgary. And that's where I really started to get interested in the scholarship of teaching and learning, because it was very well supported there as an institution that is an undergrad teaching focused institution. So that kind of set me on my path. And since then, as it said in the introduction, I have worked in multidisciplinary contexts, which I think has been very helpful for me as well in terms of expanding my thinking about the different ways that SOTL can look and the different ways that other disciplines do their research, which can also inform SOTL. So that was very, very interesting for me. And I'm actually kind of relatively new to being back in the engineering context in my faculty position. So my previous positions were administrative positions seconded away from my faculty position for a term. And now I'm back in engineering education, which is quite an exciting time to be doing that in Canada. Actually, we're quite behind the US, I would say, because we don't really have any national level funding for engineering education research or SOTL projects, but there's a big push on right now for that. So it's an exciting time, and I'm hoping to contribute it to the Canadian context going forward. So anytime I talk about the scholarship of teaching and learning, I always start by asking people, well, what do you mean when you say SOTL? Because it is such a broad, I would think of it really as a practice, like you would describe research as being a practice, but again, it can look so many different ways, and it can focus on so many different things. So you're probably familiar with Boyer's model, which was proposed about 30 years ago, of the 4 types of scholarship. What we would traditionally call the scholarship of discovery or traditional research, scholarship of application, scholarship of integration, and then the 4th one being the scholarship of teaching, and then later got called the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so when he originally proposed this model, the idea was that this was also teaching itself was a form of scholarship that faculty and instructors do as part of their work, and the motivation for the model was really trying to elevate the position of teaching within higher education and to make it more visible. And so I would say some people are still doing SOTL in that way. They are doing their traditional disciplinary research and then maybe doing a little bit of scholarship of teaching and learning on the side. Some others, like myself, have made it my main area of research. And so I think, I sort of think of it as scholarship of teaching and learning could be also the scholarship of discovery or the scholarship of integration, perhaps if you're bringing in some theory from another discipline, for example. And of course, it's very applied research as well. So Boyer proposed this model of these 4 overlapping areas of research. And for some it is, and for some it could be any one of the other types of research, or possibly multiple combinations of. So does that kind of fit with your ideas of what SOTL is? I'm just kind of curious. I want to make sure we're on the same page. So if anybody wants to do a thumbs up or put a comment in the chat or anything, that would be helpful. I'm just going to keep my eye on the chat. They do that in Australia too. Da, da, da. Oh, the acknowledgement. Yes. Anybody not agree with that? How about that? Just out of curiosity. Okay, so we're kind of all okay with thinking about SOTL in that way. Okay, great, good to know. I'm just trying to get my slides to go for, oh, there we go. Okay. And so a little bit more about this idea of what kind of research is it actually. Depending on the project that you have done or the research you have done, you'll want to think about, again, whether it's a more practice-based audience or a researchy or theory-based audience that you want to share your findings with. So I've pulled a couple of quotes from a recent paper. This is a Canadian paper, actually, from just a couple of years ago, reviewing the state of engineering education research in Canada. And as I said, we're somewhat behind the US, I would say, in many ways. But that debate about theory versus practice is still with us here as well. And we're all trying to figure this out. And I've really come to think of it mostly as a spectrum, really. But again, as you think about writing your introduction, you need to think about your audience, and you need to think about whether your message is more for a practice-based or a theory-based audience. So are you focused on what happened in perhaps your own class or your own program, sharing that with others because they can learn from your experience? Or are you trying to come up with a more not a causal explanation, but more of the mechanisms of learning that are behind what you are studying. In other words, trying to contribute to that theoretical conversation about how learning actually works. So you'll need to think about that a little bit. And I'm actually in agreement with this, this statement from the paper, and I'll read it in a second, but I think even very practice-oriented SOTL can benefit from a bit of theoretical framing. We don't need to be experts in learning theory or anything, but it can help make our study more transferable to other contexts. So I'll just read the quote. This is, again, a review of some of the engineering education research that's been happening in Canada. So studies were not usually grounded in a theoretical context that justifies the selection of survey instruments and items, or that connects the findings to what has already been demonstrated in other contexts. If for no other reason than to be more efficient in avoiding the duplication of effort and resources, it is important that engineering education research find ways to value and validate approaches that connect the studies they conduct with scholarship in other educational settings. So in our context here in Canada, it's been quite interesting to get back involved, because I would say there are a lot of people here who say they're doing engineering education research, and I look at it and I think, oh, well, that's SOTL, right? So again, there's no exact binary, there's no perfect divide between the two, but I think, if we want to really be contributing to knowledge and practice, we need to think about how our findings can be useful for others in different contexts, not just similar engineering contexts. And we can build understanding by comparing and contrasting our studies with studies in other contexts that are looking at similar things, so that we're not all just repeating work. So thinking about that a little bit as well as you prepare to write your article up. Make sure you're looking at literature from other disciplines as well. And again, kind of thinking about the theoretical understanding of what you're studying can help you find literature in other contexts, because it doesn't all exist in just the engineering education context. Okay, so with that said, we'll start thinking about, there we go. I will start thinking about identifying a target journal. And again, these are really all things that you should start to do before you even start writing your introduction. And you're probably, as you start to write and figure out what you're able to say, you're probably going to go back and forth. It's a bit of an iterative process, going back and forth between some example articles from some example journals to see if you're kind of in line with similar articles in that particular journal. So thinking about, first of all, writing. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat. I'll come back to that. So thinking about who your audience is includes thinking about the journal and thinking about what you're writing as a conversation with a community. So what do we look for when we're trying to find a journal that might be appropriate for writing up our study and submitting? Well, the aims and scope, usually a journal will say that directly on their page. And looking at what types of studies do they usually publish. So classroom level studies versus program or multi-institution kinds of studies. What are the sample sizes in the studies that they publish, the types of data? Are they all quantitative, or are they also take qualitative or mixed methods? And I really wanted to focus on this idea of evaluation versus case study, because I think that's what I've had the most difficulty with in framing a study, and in terms of getting feedback from journals who have said, okay, this isn't appropriate for this journal, and that's because we consider it evaluation, not research. So I've worked with somebody who she's a methodologist. She's a mixed methods methodologist here at the University of Alberta, and we did some research together and framed it as an evaluation study and submitted it to a journal, which came back to us and said, we don't publish evaluation, we only publish research. So again, thinking about your target audience and the journal and how they view the difference between those two things. So we would have definitely called it research. We were doing a very novel, using a very novel method, for example. We had some theoretical findings, but because we framed it as an evaluation, like we're doing this work and now we're going to study it, that was considered different than saying, okay, we have this question and now we're investigating this question in this context, which is more of a case study type of framing. So that's something that's really key, I think. And one of the differences that people see between SOTL or evaluation and case study or research. So you'll want to look carefully for cues in some of the publications in the journals you're looking at for how people frame the research. And some journals might take both, but some journals might consider evaluation to be not research, right? So just something to really be aware of. And so we rewrote the introduction actually and framed it differently, and then it was fine. But I mean, it's the same study, it's just how we framed it. So again, the difference is sort of, we have this program or this course, whatever it is we're evaluating, and this is our findings, versus we have a question, we're investigating the question in this context, which would be, you would frame that, you would call it a case study if you were doing it that way. And certainly you could probably write your study up both ways as well. So again, comes back to what is the message you want to put out there? What is the audience that you intend to speak to? And then how can you frame your study most appropriately? So other things you might want to look for: style of writing, how formal it is. Typically in science and engineering disciplines, we tend to have a very third person, very remote style of writing, right? Where we don't connect ourselves to the context of the research. And again, depending on the journal, that may or may not be okay. I've certainly over the years started to use first person much more often in my writing. But again, a more traditional quantitative journal might not view that as the typical type of writing that they accept. So I always encourage people to push the boundaries a little bit if you can, but also be aware of what the common strategies are in the context that you're targeting. And then, of course, length. What are the proportions of the articles in terms of the different sections? How many pages? How long is the literature review? Those sorts of things are all good questions to ask yourself as you look at different potential target journals. And of course, I would encourage you to go with open access if you can, just for the philosophy of it more than anything else, but also it's going to be viewable, and hopefully your research will have even more impact if you do publish it in an open access journal. Okay, so I thought I just took some screenshots from a couple of different journals. So this one is Teaching in Higher Education. So certainly publishes SOTL studies, but more on the research side of the spectrum, I guess I would say. So you'll note right on their webpage here, they do say we do not publish evaluations of policy or practice. So if you were submitting to a journal like this, you would definitely want to frame your research as a case study. So again, your problem is sort of framed in the literature. What is the gap in the literature? And therefore you're studying it in a particular context. And then you get into describing your context and why it's a good context for doing the study in. So that would be one type of journal. And this was in one of the top, it was in the top 10 list a couple years ago for teaching in higher education types of journals. So it's a well-respected journal. Another one, and I'm specifically picking multidisciplinary journals here as well, because I'm assuming you're probably more familiar with engineering focused journals. I wanted you to take a look at some of the multidisciplinary journals that are also out there that might be an option for you. So this one, Teaching, Learning, Inquiry, is associated with the International Society for Scholarship of Teaching and Learning. And they are quite open and publish quite a broad range of different types of articles, including what they call SOTL projects, but also theoretical articles, essays, and those sorts of things as well. So something to keep in mind. And again, you're going to frame your introduction differently. I'm going to come back to the commentary in a minute, and I give you something to do. Okay, so before we get into you thinking about your research question and how to write it, because again, I mean, you already have a research question if you've done a study, but you need to write it in a way that makes sense for your audience. And you want it to be as explicit as possible about the context of the research, as well as what you're actually studying and the type of question. So I just picked out a few. This is the publication from my first study that I did. It's not, I'm not suggesting that you should go read it or anything. I don't think it's particularly groundbreaking, but at the time, being at Mount Royal University, a small teaching focused institution, I had really small classes, and I was interested in doing scholarship of teaching and learning, but there was no possibility that I was going to be able to do a quantitative study. So I wanted to kind of explore some qualitative methods, and therefore I did some think alouds with my students in their first year mechanics course. So this question is written as a very exploratory type of question. What are the difficulties the students have? I collected qualitative research or qualitative data from the interviews. So just using it as an example of a type of research question. And then again, I've pulled some examples that are not all from an engineering context. So the next one is from dental education, actually, and I just picked it because it's a really nice example of a fairly simple, straightforward, and well done experimental study, which can be hard to do because we often don't have the ability to do random assignment into control groups and that sort of thing. But this particular study did. So there's an impact or an experimental design type of question for you. Some questions are more survey based. So what are students' views, questions about their attitudes and behaviors, things like that are appropriate for a survey design. This one is also not engineering, it's from a biology context. And the last one is a engineering context in a fourth year blended learning course, and they did a correlational study to look at students' interaction with the online materials in the course. So again, you want your research question to reflect the type of study that you did. Another thing to think about when writing your research question is to try to frame it so that you get the topic in there, that's clear what the topic is. So you want to hopefully be a fairly novel topic, or perhaps you're trying to replicate or reproduce a study from a different context. I also put the term transferability in there, which is a term more commonly used in qualitative research, where replication studies obviously aren't as common, but you would expect that your findings might be transferable to other contexts, not necessarily replicable where you get the exact same result, but they could still inform another context. So that might be a term you would consider using. You hope to give new insights into your topic or a theory by maybe looking at it from a different angle compared to what exists in the literature before now. And again, you want to think about whether your topic is of interest to those concerned with theory or practice, or perhaps both. So again, we haven't got into the details of writing an introduction yet, but I really wanted to focus on thinking about your research question first. And that's because you want to think about your introduction as giving the rationale for the research question, right? So you're kind of starting with whatever caused you to develop your research question, describing that, whether it's literature or practice-based, and then you want to funnel down and give a rationale for the particular answerable question that you are addressing with your particular study. So really thinking about the audience and how you frame your research question is important for that before you get to actually writing. Okay, so I'm just curious. You don't have to have a perfectly formed research question as you would write it in a paper just yet, but I'm going to just take, let's say, a minute here and ask you if you are willing to share what your research question is, just in the chat, so I can get a sense of what people are working on. So I'll give you a minute for you to do that and for us all to kind of scan the variety of questions that people have. And again, it doesn't have to be perfectly formulated. Anyone?
I also locating and typing them in right now. Let's give it a minute. Here we go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And also, I just realized I thought we were originally starting at 12, but we started at 12:15. So does that mean I have till 1:15 for the presentation?
Yes, okay. You do.
Perfect.
So Nadia, you sent that message directly to me. So if you could, if it was directly to me, that's fine. If not, you can put it into the regular chat for everybody.
Interesting. So far I'm seeing mostly impact types of questions, but also how can we broaden participation? That's an interesting question. I didn't know what HCD was either, so I'm glad you asked that, Brian. Oh, great. Really interesting questions. Challenging questions too. Okay, great. That's helpful. You can, if you haven't done it yet, but you'd like to in a bit, once you finish formulating it, you can still add that to the chat if you like. I'm also going to ask if a few of you be willing to share your data sources. So you could mention, you know, are they interviews? Are they grades? Are they like, what are you actually analyzing as part of your study? Because that'll help me with the next section as well. Human-centered design, good. Okay, interviews and focus groups, good. Surveys. Assignments. Okay. Great. Okay, that's helpful. Good to know. So some people haven't done a study yet, but that's okay too, because I think, you know, thinking about how you want to frame whatever you end up doing is still useful, I hope. So, pre and post. Okay, great. So we do have a mix of some quantitative and qualitative data, which is good to know. That's really the most important part that I needed to know. Okay, so let's get into the actual content then of what would go into a research article if you were writing up a study. And again, we really want to think about framing the introduction to lead up to the logical final statement, which is, okay, so naturally, I've just made a rationale for this research question. So naturally, this is my research question, and then you go on to start to explain your methods and whatnot. So some people sort of call this the problem. What is the problem? What is the gap you're trying to address? And then kind of hook people into thinking, okay, yes, this is important, and therefore the question is, and you put the question out at the end of the introduction. Another way to think about it would be the rationale for the study itself. Which would include both a question that might have arisen from your practice, from your own class, something new that you're trying, or something that you're trying to understand better. And so again, some of the rationale might be your own perspective, as well as some literature review. And then I really want you to start thinking a little bit about theory and conceptual framework. And again, we're not going to go into theory in this presentation. We don't have time, but how can we describe the kind of learning that we're interested in a way that can make our research more broadly applicable? So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then of course, in a SOTL study, you're definitely going to want to give a pretty detailed description of the context of the study, because that again will help somebody else understand whether your findings might be transferable, if not replicable, to their particular context. And then I'll talk a little bit about positionality as well, which is an interesting concept for us engineers, but important for SOTL as well, I would say. So those are the content bits of an introduction. And again, the order that they go in and how you write it up is going to depend on your intended audience as well as your journal. So take a look at lots of examples in journals as well, but think about these three pieces of content that would go into an introduction. So our rationale, usually we start with that, right? And as I mentioned, the rationale might come out of your practice itself, or it might come out of the literature. You might be aware that there's a whole lot of research on a certain topic in engineering education. Let's pick active learning, for example, because that's been well written about. But you may also notice there's a particular aspect of active learning that you're trying to do, and the answer isn't out there in the literature. So you might actually start with a literature review and say, okay, here's a gap, and now I'm exploring that gap with my study. So again, perfectly possible to use both. Perfectly possible to put the order differently depending on how you're framing your study. If it's more practice oriented, you're probably going to write more about your class and what you're trying to do in your class, and that's what generated your research question, as opposed to more theoretically based where your question might come out of the literature. But you're definitely going to be using a combination of both. Okay, so now we get into the tricky stuff. What is a theoretical or a conceptual framework? So this is, again, coming back to those underlying mechanisms that we're assuming are happening when we are analyzing our data. So some would argue, we can't actually observe learning, right? If you think about it, I mean, learning is actually some kind of change that happens in our brain, and we do not have the scientific ability at this point to try to measure that in any way. So all the things we're using as data are really just indicators of learning. We think that if a student is able to answer a certain type of question on an exam, for example, then they must have learned. If they are able to reflect on a particular concept and connect it to an application, that might be an indicator that they have learned something. So just kind of going beyond just using a mark, which could also be a source of data, but what does that number, that mark, actually represent? Thinking about how are we actually defining the learning that we are trying to understand with the data that we have. So the data is kind of the evidence, what is the actual indicator that that we are assuming is the indicator of learning. That can be helpful in terms of going back to the literature and thinking, okay, so is it an actual cognitive process that I'm trying to understand that the students are able to do or not do? Or is it something, in teamwork? We talk about social learning. So they are not just doing a cognitive process on their own. They're actually interacting with their peers, and that is part of a social learning situation. So again, trying to think about what is the actual learning. Can you define it in some way to help you connect to some literature that you can use to frame your study? So there's all kinds of definitions of learning out there, whether it's the ability to apply a concept to a new context, whether it's a change in attitude, for example, like if we're looking at developing students' ethical behavior or their leadership skills. Some of those things are much more abstract ideas, but how are you actually defining that change that you want to see, and then connect that to what indicators you believe are showing that learning, and then coming to the evidence. So that can help you frame your introduction. Even if you're not going into, deeply into a particular theory, you really want to try to describe that learning that you're hoping for in as much detail as possible, because you want it to be understandable to your reader, why you chose the particular types of data that you chose. So that's all going to be part of your introduction. Does that help? Does that make sense? I did put one resource in the references at the end that I'll mention. It's a paper that I wrote with an education colleague, trying to talk about different categories of theories. Again, coming back to that idea of is it cognitive change that you're looking for, or is it a social, more of a social change in how students interact that you might be looking for, or change in attitude. So I did write a paper after my first solo project, actually, when I was exposed to the wide variety of educational research. I wrote a paper with an education colleague that I always say is the paper I wish I had when I got started. So I'll highlight that when we get to the end. But for now, we'll just say you really want to try to define the learning that you're interested in as clearly as possible, beyond going to a number, for example. So what is your thinking behind why your data is evidence of the learning that you're trying to generate or support, you could say, in students? Okay, just checking how I'm doing for time. Oh, we're doing great. Good. All right, so the last one is context and positionality, and this might be a new idea for some of you, and in fact it was fairly new to me until a couple of years ago. So I mentioned already that you'll want to describe the context of your study at some point in the introduction. And so if you think about, coming back to this example of active learning, there's so much research on active learning in STEM, not just engineering, but in STEM broadly. One of the criticisms of SOTL has been that that they're all very small local studies, and therefore they don't really contribute to anything beyond, a very similar context that the study took place in. But coming back to this idea of theory and context, you can write your study up in such a way that it does have broader applicability if you rely on some theory to kind of frame your definition of learning and how you evaluate that learning. And also, if you describe enough about the context that somebody else can really decide what is different about their context and whether the findings would be transferable or not. So coming back to the example of active learning, there was a meta-analysis done of like over 250 active learning studies in STEM just a couple of years ago. If you're not familiar with it, I didn't put that in the references, but I could look it up and send it along if you're not familiar with it. It's Delorier et al. I think it's 2014, but anyway, they looked at a whole bunch of active learning studies, did a meta-analysis, because one of the criticisms again is like, okay, sure, well, that worked in your context, but that won't work for me because blah, blah, blah. You'll maybe have heard that from some of your colleagues who are maybe a little bit more resistant to change and innovation in teaching. And so if you give enough context about the study and the context that your study takes place in, then somebody else can come along and then compare and contrast your study with others in order to continue to build knowledge on top of that, right? So that's, again, one of the ways that you can make your SOTL research have more impact. So in the case of, let's say, an active learning study where you're doing a flipped classroom, this is a very typical example, but again, because there's so much research out there on this, it's a nice example. So you put some of the content delivery online, you do more active learning activities in your class, you find it makes a difference to something, whatever that is, student learning engagement, perhaps. There's other ways to assess beyond just whether, marks increased or student learning increased. You might be interested in engagement, for example. And so if you describe that context clearly, such as, what year was the course in, how much content did you put online, how much time per week, were the students engaged in active learning strategies, what kind of strategies did you do, then again, that makes your study more analyzable by others who might want to compare and contrast their findings, and another way to build knowledge and contribute to the field. So we're not used to doing that in typical engineering studies, because there's typically in the physical world, there's a lot less possibility for variety. If you have a metal that's a certain percentage of steel, for example, it's going to be pretty much the same in any context that you use it in. So if you know the composition, then you pretty much know the material properties, and you don't have to spend as much time on the context, whereas in education it's quite different. So take a look at that as you're looking through example studies and writing up your work, and try to be as clear about your context as possible for all the variables that might affect your results. So gender, for example, is another one that is starting to be looked at more often, which for some reason it was never before. Everybody was aggregated into, a control group and an experimental group. But people are starting to look at demographics, so male, female. Also, actually, all the work on active learning is starting to look a little bit more in depth in terms of students' social demographics. And it turns out that even though overall we know that active learning is generally better for supporting student learning, especially in earlier year courses, it needs a lot of structure in order for students from lower social demographic groups to succeed, not because of any reasons associated with them themselves, but because they typically don't have the same educational background. They haven't been as exposed to extracurricular activities that, might develop their time management skills. For example, they might have gone to a less academic focused school, for example. So again, giving some demographic information would be another way that somebody else can come along and reanalyze your study, or compare and contrast their study with yours based on different demographics. So just really important to think about the variables in your context that might be useful for others to know, even if you didn't control them or not. What is the makeup of your student population, for example. So hopefully that makes sense. And sometimes that's in a separate, after the introduction, you might put that as a separate section in your paper called course and institutional context or something like that. But it's really still leading up to describing the rationale for your study before you get into methods. So that's important to think about as well in your writing. And I have time to talk about one last thing. So this is the idea of positionality. Is anybody familiar with that term? I want to say a yes or no in the comments. No, okay, interesting, good. Some people, yes. So we've got a mix, good to know. Good, great. So again, not a term that's commonly used, well, not in engineering, but not in quantitative disciplines for the most part, because the way we do our research, we tend to think of ourselves as objective and apart from the research, and we collect the data and analyze it, and we are as objective as we can possibly be. And of course, in SOTL research, we try to be objective, but we're not entirely objective because we're usually the instructor of the course or we're involved with the program or whatever, right? And so we do have some knowledge of the context, some personal knowledge of the context, and possibly some personal motivation for doing the study, in addition to what somebody who might be an outside researcher would have. And so this is a bit of a tricky situation for those of us who have been trained to be as objective as possible in our research. But we also have to start thinking about ourselves as not the traditional researcher who comes from the outside, conducts the research and goes away. We are a researcher in the context that we are doing the research. We're familiar with the context. We are our students, instructors, as well as researchers. We are teaching the courses that we are researching. And so even though we try to be, most of us, I think, try to be as objective as possible, we still have our own positionality in the research that could affect, you know, what we think is important in terms of data, what we think is important in terms of a question, and what is our motivation for doing the study in the first place? Are we researching a particular new teaching activity, like a lab activity that we designed? So stating those kinds of things in the research is becoming more common and more accepted and even encouraged, actually. And something for you to think about. So again, depending on your journal or not, they may or may not think of that as a common thing to do, but I do think that's the way we are going and the way that we should go. So coming back to sort of just general feminism, really, feminist critiques of science that has typically focused on a male participant. If you think of medical research, for example, there's all kinds of research that we're just starting to realize, oh, this drug or this, you know, intervention was only tested on white males. Maybe it doesn't apply to females or to people from other ethnic backgrounds. And so that whole awareness of a different population was just completely ignored until fairly recently. So feminists would argue that, you know, even science, medical science, which is, you know, considered sort of at the top of the hierarchy, there's still positionality involved in that type of research in terms of how you decide what is an important question and thinking carefully about what are you possibly ignoring and why, if that makes sense. So in a SOTL context, if let's say you are, well, I'll use my own study as an example. So I was teaching with a colleague a first year design course, which was of course online in the last couple of years. So we were particularly concerned about students' sense of connection to each other and community building in a team-based course like that. So we designed a survey specifically asking questions about those kinds of issues. And then when we wrote it up, we framed it that way. We didn't say, you know, here's an abstract course and this is the question that was studied. We said, okay, here's the course, here's the situation we were in, this is what we were concerned about, this is why we designed the course this way, and this is why we were interested in this particular question. And so it's really framing the research with the researchers' motivations, not just based on literature, but based on being in practice, framing those into the description and the rationale for the study. So again, that's a big jump for most of us who are not used to writing that way. But if you look in my reference list, I've cited Alison Godwin here from 2020. And she's one of the, she's doing a lot of great work in engineering education research. You may be familiar with her work, and she's currently, I think she's the editor of Studies in Engineering in Education. So this particular article is an editorial she wrote for that journal, really talking about her own journey in education research and realizing that positionality statements are important. So for example, we haven't really looked at demographic backgrounds and how that might affect students' experiences in engineering until now. People are starting to look at those kinds of questions. And that's why writing a positionality statement is important, because it helps to frame why we think a particular question is important and gets us to think about what we might not be thinking about and should take into account perhaps in the next study. So I know that often we tend to be, well, I tend to be resistant to some of the ideas that some of my qualitative colleagues are doing in their research until I see, oh, someone in engineering and education is doing that. Okay, it must be okay then, right? So Alison Godwin has even made a case for the need to put positionality statements in our research articles. So there you go. I think we are going that way as all of us from quantitative backgrounds start to learn to do this work in different ways than what we're used to, but also very important ways, I would say. So I think just about right on time. Those are the things that I wanted to cover. Just summarizing again, I think these are the items, like the content things that need to go into an introduction. But again, depending on your audience and your journal and how you're framing your study, the order of those things might change. Certainly look at lots of examples. Look at examples in your target journal especially, but look at other examples too. Which is the reference. So this paper, the 2015 Miller, Young, and Yo paper is the one that I wrote after I did my first study, because again, I was just starting to learn about qualitative research. People were talking about theories and different methodologies. I didn't know what they were talking about. So I convinced my education friend to write this paper with me. And she was quite uncomfortable about it actually, because she was thinking, there's nothing new here. We're just kind of summarizing an introduction to education research, but I was bound and determined that this was going to be an important article. And both of us work with faculty who are new to SOTL. For the most part, yes, most faculty find that article very useful. So I hope you will too. So I hope that was helpful, and I'm willing to stay and answer any questions that you have.
Does anybody have a few? We'll probably take a couple of questions. Here's one. Are notions of context and positionality somewhat overlapping, or are they distinctly different?
Oh, is anything distinctly different? I don't. I'd have to think about it. I would say they're different, yes. So the context is describing the context of the study. as clearly as possible so that somebody else might either be able to determine whether your findings would be transferable to their context, or if they wanted to do some kind of meta-analysis of studies on a particular topic, what is the kind of information they would need to know about that context to understand why your findings might be different from somebody doing a similar study in a different context. So that's how I would conceptualize context. Now, again, depending on how objective versus subjective you think you are in your research, I guess positionality overlaps with that a little bit, but positionality is more about you, what you are interested in. And so for example, again, coming back to the study we did what in our engineering design course, we found that the female students, not surprisingly, but it's nice to have evidence, the female students felt a lower sense of belonging at the end of the first year design course than the male students did. And so we actually did some follow-up interviews as well, and particularly interviewed students from underrepresented groups. And so part of our positionality statement for our team, there was 3 of us, was that we're all white and heterosexual. So we were interviewing students who identified as queer, who identified as being from different ethnic groups and whatnot. And so we acknowledge that, you know, perhaps they might not tell us everything that they feel as a result of us being white. And so we had to carefully go back through our interview transcripts and really reflect on whether we were creating a safe environment for the students to feel free to say what, and of course we had a research assistant doing the interviews, it wasn't the instructors. But again, that kind of relates to a possible limitation of the study because of our positionality as 3 white people.
Great, thank you. So I think this comes to the close of our session. Thank you.
I do have one more question that I got directly. Can I just answer it since we have time? So the difference between an evaluation and a case study again is, really in terms of how you frame it for the most part. So if you start with, you know, I'm teaching this course, this is a new strategy I wanted to try in my course and I wanted to see whether it worked, or maybe it's a program or whatever, but you're basically evaluating whether something worked or not. And the reason for the research is because you're evaluating something that's happening in practice. So some articles would consider that not research because it's too practice and evaluation oriented. As opposed to if you frame it in the literature and say, okay, here's a literature review on this particular topic, there's a gap here, and I studied a question which helps fill this gap in my particular context, then that's framing it as a case study where you're framing it as contributing to the literature as opposed to you're trying to evaluate something that's happening in your class or your program.
Thank you. So, well, thank you so much, Dr. Miller-Young. And we are so, your presentation, people are already asking for your slides, like you were only 2 slides in and they were already asking for slides. So they wanted to have them before their breakout room, their breakout discussion, and they are, Sarah, they were put in, there you go again. So they're in the slides were put in the chat. So anybody wants to have them to take into their breakout, the breakout sessions you're coming into next, you can go ahead and do that. I think that speaks really to how powerful your presentation was, Dr. Miller-Young. So thank you so much.
I hope it was helpful. And I hope as you're writing, if anybody, well, even if you don't publish something, but I'd be curious to hear more about your research as you write it up. So feel free to send me a message if you like.
Okay. If you want to put your email in the chat,
my email is on the slides, on the slide handout.
Oh, it's on the slides. Okay, yeah. Great. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to start putting you into breakout rooms so that you can work in your teams. So please make sure that you have changed your name on Zoom to first the normal of your team, then space your first name, then space your last name, because we use this to put you into your teams. Now, we're going to transition to the 20-minute breakout session for you to work with your teams. This breakout is intended for your writing teams to work independently together. And so you're going to use this time to discuss how you're going to handle today's assignment. And that's already been posted to your team's Google Drive folder. And you're going to be preparing questions for your mentors, because you're going to transition from your team breakout rooms into breakout rooms with your mentors. So please also note that your draft research question will be due to your mentor via Google Drive by 9 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, July 20th. This is so that your mentor is able to provide you with feedback. Then after the session, as I said, we're going to transition to a second breakout room at 3:35 p.m. And then your teams are going to be meeting with your mentors for 40 minutes. So it's 20 minutes with your teams and 40 minutes with your mentors. And then in the mentor session, there will be 5 breakout rooms. And each room will have 4 teams. So discuss with your colleagues and your mentors any challenges that you're facing with the mentors. You're going to be discussing with your colleagues and the mentors any challenge you're facing with the manuscript development process or anything else. And then please note, you will not be moved back to the main Zoom room between the 2 breakout sessions. So you're going to go right from the breakout sessions with your teams to the breakout session with your mentors. Your writing team lead or a reporter from a team will report out on the insights gained during the discussions in the breakout rooms at 4:20. So please make sure that you have somebody identified who's going to be doing the reporting out. And please note again that the breakout rooms are not recorded, just the main sessions. All right. So with that, Kathy, I think you're going to be putting them into their breakout rooms with their teams.
Yes.
And then they'll be transitioned from that to the breakout teams with their mentors after 20 minutes. Great. Thanks, everyone. Welcome back from your breakout rooms and your break. So now what we're going to do is share a brief report out from your working sessions. Now, I just want to let everybody know that we have 20 teams and we have 20 minutes, or we have 30 minutes, but not really anymore. We have about 20 minutes. So everybody only has about 1 minute. So just kind of think about what is something, a major impression that you have, and share that out. And I'm going to tell everybody who's up and who's on deck and who's in the hole, so you know. Well, actually, we're just going to go down the list, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. So the first team up is team 1, and the team lead is Eve. Eve, you want, or you can always point to somebody else if you want somebody else to talk. Go ahead, Eve.
Sure. So our project is focusing on seeing whether improved safety training, both from the direction of the students and also from the students' interaction, and basically the equipment safety too, will improve, student retention and experience in the program. And I think that one of the things that we got out of the breakout session was just kind of that our question is really multiple questions, and we're going to have to kind of think that over and try to clarify, I think, what question we really want to focus on. And Anne or Matt, do y'all want to chime in at all?
Okay.
I guess not. It's okay. Thanks, Eve. So the next person is Sarah from team 2.
Yeah, hi everyone. With team 2, we are trying to bring a new theoretical framework to engineering education called the capabilities approach. It's been used in other areas, but to our knowledge, it has not yet been applied in engineering. And my first impression is that we are biting off more than we can chew. So we're going to have to work really hard over the next week to narrow our research question to something that is answerable in one article. So that's the task.
We did see that in some of the scopes, but we thought that's part of the learning experience, right? How do you scope a project? So thanks, Sarah.
But the good news with that, right? The good news with that is you've got several studies lined up.
Yeah,
So as
you
you
got
break
a
it
whole
up,
bunch
it-
of journal papers, right? So that's awesome. But we did see that, and we did think that was part of the learning experience, right? So team 3, Nancy, or whoever is a spokesperson for team 3.
I'll go. Hi. So our project is about trying to add technology to the classroom and active learning activities, see how that improves learning, see if that increases engagement and gets students more involved. We also are looking at the delineation between free tools and tools or technologies with paywalls. Does that make a difference? And try to identify best practices for using technology so we don't have technology overload for our students. And so just like the last team, we talked about scope with our mentors, and that will be a big challenge for us this week in writing our research questions.
Great, thanks, Nancy. So team 4, Brad.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my team's looking at conducting a scoping review of the teaching of systems thinking, ultimately with an eye towards engineering students, but looking across literature from multiple disciplines, business, economics, etc. I'm interested in this topic because I'm thinking of proposing a general education course on systems thinking, but one of the conversations we were having is framing it for a journal audience in terms of elevating the questions so that it would be of interest more broadly as well.
Thanks, Brad. Harley in team 5, team 5.
Thank you. So Hale and I are working on a dual institution book club, and we want to get at issues of community, identity. And so we worked together on refining study parameters, data collection, discussions. And the main impression was the value of the mentors and doing this as a process, and that this is kind of laid out for us step by step. So we're delighted with that.
Great, thank you. So Jessica, team 6. Or anybody from team 6.
Hi, Jessica, our team leader, had to run off.
That's okay.
So
go ahead.
I'm Jihong Liao. I'll be presenting for team 6. So our team, we'd like to focus on looking at the entrepreneurial mindset gap or transition between engineering students and early career alumni. Just looking to see how differences in curiosity, connections, and creating value changes as students gain experience in industry.
Great, thank you. So team 7.
Hi, my name's Sarah Wilson, and let me turn on my camera so you can see me there. And so we are interested in how has the pandemic impacted our students and impacted the way instructors engage students, and what can we bring from the pandemic to improve student engagement in the future? And we are mostly in the process of narrowing that down.
I think that's a very common problem, but it's not really a problem, as one of our mentors just said. So next is team 8.
Yes, our research is about defining and identifying the best practices of virtual design and construction, building information modeling, and cutting edge technology in the architecture, engineering, and construction curricula. Okay, and it is a controversial topic at this point. We believe we will add a piece of knowledge and to help our colleagues to teach, and implement technology in the right way.
Thank you. Team 9.
Sure. So we're interested in looking at information literacy, being able to measure information literacy, particularly in instances where maybe you're not necessarily a content expert. And so looking at a method of being able to do that in a qualitative way without necessarily introducing potential biases that can exist in the informational literacy evaluation tools.
Thanks. Team 10.
Okay, so our research is looking at we're exploring the voices of international and minoritized graduate students and faculty members, and to showcase how their experiences and identities have impacted or influenced their journey through the doctoral process into academia, and potentially gather strategies and recommendations for educators on how to better support these groups of students in their doctoral academic journey process. And our discussion was around how to elevate the writing, they do a trial ethnographic study to the level of a JEE publishing article, and some things we need to put in mind if we are aiming to do this. Yes.
Great, thank you so much. Team 11.
Brian, are you there?
Yeah, there you go. Yep, there you are.
No, it's Bob. Is Brian there? Because Brian's team lead.
Brian, are you here from Team 11?
He might
If
have.
not, Bob.
I'll still fill in then.
Go ahead, Bob. Yep.
If he comes in, we can. So our question is with regards, I'll just say sensory, the effect of sensory impact in instructional methods, but the restricted is limiting the scope to EE laboratories, freshmen, and how that sensory input impact, very trouble with measuring it, but how effective is it? Does it really make a difference on that in early laboratories? And Brian could probably say it better, but he must have to step away.
That's okay, you're a team. Team 12.
Yeah, so our research question is around human-centered design instruction and how that can foster inclusive learning spaces, like in the EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion space, and help retain students from underrepresented groups. So we're still sort of focusing exactly what that research question is. And we had some discussion also about how to structure our study, given that we are all from different institutions, so 5 group members from different institutions, and could we potentially open it up to expand that in future after maybe an initial pilot study?
Thank you. Team 13.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to speak for Team 13, Betten and myself. Our research question is, we're interested in, during student oral presentations in your classroom, engaging the listening students and how to improve their engagement, the quality of the Q&A we have maybe at the end of an oral presentation, as well as the quality of feedback if we ask them to write comments for their peers, both in quantity and quality of what they're writing. And so we have sort of started developing a tool, sort of a feedback matrix for them to use while they're listening. And one of the things we'll need to work on right now is kind of researching both how much time we want to spend on improving the tool itself versus just implementing it in our classes this fall, and then evaluating how that goes. Do we want to do both? So that's sort of what we talked about with our mentors.
Very interesting. Thank you. Team 14.
Hello, hello. Our title of our research is Intersectionality, Gender, and Other Social Identities Shaping STEM Success in the Academy. We've been told to change that to higher education, and we will do that. The research question that we framed and received feedback on today was what unique experience facilitates and or undermines the success of marginalized women in higher education. And we're going to drill down on that a little bit more, and some of those areas of intersectionality include race, ethnicity, ability status, immigration status, and some other identities that we'll uncover as we go along. But specifically also on tenure, we help to define success and what are the things that prevent promotion to tenure.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you. Team 15.
Hey, everyone. From Team 15 from WPI. In the context of engineering design and rapid prototyping in the makerspace environment, our research question is about what is the impact of entrepreneurial mindset learning troubleshooting workshops in teaching students problem-solving skills so that they can succeed in project-heavy engineering curriculums. When you think about troubleshooting, I think about identifying the problem, but also coming up with a recommended solution. There could be multiple solutions. And I think it'll be really interesting to focus on what is the value of those alternatives and the effectiveness that entrepreneurial mindset learning will have on that impact.
Great, thank you. Team 16.
Team 16 is looking at K through 12 STEM outreach programs. And so our research question is, does STEM outreach support the development of entrepreneurial mindset, and also looking at some best practices for STEM outreach programs as a result of that. So we look forward to working with our mentor on this project.
Great, thank you. Team 17.
Good afternoon, everyone. Team 17 is exploring the writing in reflective journals in an engineering design course and looking for the development of entrepreneurial mindset over time in the course.
Thank you. Team 18.
Hello, everyone. Our project is about assessing entrepreneurial mindset in a senior capstone design mechanical engineering course. The biggest thing I took away on behalf of my team from the working session with mentors is clarity on how best to complete the assignment, what kind of answers they're looking for, the bandwidth they have, if we had more than one research question, so on and so forth. And I think that will be very useful for us when we get together early next week and finish our assignment, and look forward to getting feedback on that.
Thank you. You guys are doing a great job here. Team, I think I'm on team 19 now. Yes, team 19.
Yes, so we are working in a study where we develop a framework to authoring projects that helps to develop skills in engineering and EM for first-year students in engineering. So the study that we just did includes two cohorts, fall and spring, and we're trying to measure how this framework is complete, it's transferable, helps to author more projects to keep it engaged, to keep the students engaged, and and how this is helping to develop the EM and engineering design processes in our first year students. So we learned that we need to put the focus on the study, and we learned how to write better research questions from our session, which is really helpful. So we hope to continue working with our mentors.
That's great. Team 20.
Okay, this is team 20. We are looking at how African-American, Latino, and Asian Pacific women make career choices in engineering and STEM. And we want to look at particularly who are the key influencers in those choices and what level of influence they play in the decisions that are made.
Thank you. Well, I am very impressed. I gave you each a minute and you did not take your full minute, not one of you. I was timing you. So I would say those are some awesome elevator pitches. And you've really done a great job. And wow, if we keep this up, everybody will always be able to share. So thank you so much. Because we do have a few minutes, are there one or two mentors that would like to give some impressions before we close the day? You also have to stick to the 1 minute. Any mentor would like to share anything?
I think that there are a lot of great ideas. I think in our teams and with a broader group, it's sorting out, narrowing the research questions into single papers and thinking about the evidence to support those research questions.
Thanks. There was another mentor that also was chiming in.
Yeah, so from our team, we talked about the importance of having a mentor text, and so finding really good examples of a similar type of paper. It doesn't have to be the same topic, but from the venue that you kind of want to go to and working off of that being really important. And then another thing that I just noticed was that, you know, some of the teams in our group, you know, are more on the educational research side, almost more than SOTL. And so sort of figuring out where the venue is and how to you know, frame the study effectively based on the goals and the audience, you know, pulling from the themes we heard earlier today.
That's really interesting insights. Any other mentor would like to share?
And I think it is great to be engaged with the new faculty members or researchers who investigate in the engineering education topics, because there are things that we've been doing as the engineering education community, but with the fresh eyes and fresh experience, I think it is great. I think there are different nuances to it. So I think it's going to be, this program is wonderful, and I'm very excited to see that how our team's papers will turn out. So yeah, thank you.
Great, that's awesome to hear. We're excited too. Any other mentors like to share? I still have about 5 minutes. You guys are doing a great job sticking with the 1 minute rule. Did I hear somebody? No? Okay. Well, thanks so much, everyone. We have had a great session today, and I hope you are all so positive about the impact that this workshop will have for you. And so remember that the next session will be held next Friday on July 22nd, same time. It's a Friday, 1 to 5 p.m. Eastern time. And I would like to encourage the writing teams to reach out to your mentor and schedule your office hours. Please work with your writing team and your mentors to develop and finalize your research question, and the mentors will provide written feedback, you know, submitted to your mentor by the deadline, and then mentors will provide written feedback on your assignments by Friday, July 22nd. So lastly, we have an end of survey. You know, as always, we always have to do our assessment evaluation, just like you. So we have an end of session survey that we would like you both to take, the participants and the mentors. The survey link is now posted on the chat, and we've given you sufficient time. It won't probably take more than 5 minutes. So we're giving you this time to complete our survey before we close, and you can still get out a little early on a Friday afternoon. So please take a few minutes, open up that survey in the chat right now, and please give us your feedback so we can continue to improve the APA ENG program. So thank you so much. Please take the survey, and we really look forward to seeing you next week. So once you finish the survey, feel free to leave.